Let me start by saying something that most mothers-in-law probably can't say with a straight face. I genuinely thought I was doing everything right. And I mean everything. I was determined to be the mother-in-law that every daughter-in-law dreams of having, the one who supports instead of interferes, who welcomes instead of judges. When my son Marcus first brought Sarah home 2 years ago, I made a conscious decision. I was going to embrace this woman with open arms and give them the space they needed to build their relationship. Marcus was 25, had a good job, and for the first time in years, I could see genuine happiness in his eyes when he talked about someone. I still remember that first dinner vividly. Sarah was so nervous she could barely make eye contact with me. She kept fidgeting with her napkin and giving these short, polite answers to my questions. I thought it was sweet, actually. Here was this young woman who clearly cared enough about what I thought to be genuinely nervous about making a good impression. So I made sure she felt welcome. I asked about her work at the marketing firm, her family back in California, her interests and hobbies. I wanted her to know that she mattered to me because she mattered to Marcus. By the end of that evening, she was laughing at my stories and asking to see Marcus's baby photos. I thought we'd really connected. Over the next few months, that connection seemed to grow stronger. Sarah would call me just to chat about her day. She'd text me funny memes she thought I'd enjoy. When they were looking for their first apartment together, she actually asked if I wanted to come along to a few showings. Have you ever tried to be the perfect in-law? It's harder than it sounds, but I was determined to get it right. I helped them research neighborhoods, drove them around to look at different areas, even co-signed their lease when they found a place they loved but were worried about the credit requirements. When they moved in, I showed up with cleaning supplies and takeout food, then left after a couple of hours so they could settle in as a couple. I was so proud of how we were all handling this new dynamic. Marcus seemed relieved that his girlfriend and his mother got along so well. Sarah seemed genuinely happy to have me involved in their lives. And I felt like I was finally getting the daughter I'd never had. That's when I started the secret wedding fund. I knew they were serious about each other, and I also knew that weddings were expensive. Marcus was doing well at his job, but they were young and still building their financial foundation. So every month I'd put aside a couple $100s in a separate savings account. It was my way of investing in their future happiness, my way of making sure that when the time came, money wouldn't be a barrier to the wedding they dreamed of. I never told them about the fund. I wanted it to be a surprise, something I could reveal when they got engaged and started making actual plans. I imagined the moment when I'd tell Sarah that I'd been saving to help make their wedding day special. I pictured her getting emotional, maybe even crying happy tears, feeling loved and supported by her future mother-in-law. I thought I was being the perfect balance of involved and respectful. I was showing interest in their lives without being intrusive. I was offering help without being controlling. I was building a relationship with Sarah without competing with her for Marcus's attention. Looking back now, I realize how naive I was. But at the time, everything seemed to be going exactly as it should. Sarah and I were getting closer, Marcus was happy, and I felt like I'd successfully navigated the tricky waters of mother-in-law relationships. I thought I was doing everything right. I had no idea that everything I thought I knew about our family was about to be turned completely upside down. And it all started with what should have been the most natural conversation in the world about wedding planning. The wedding conversations started about 6 months after Marcus proposed. Sarah would call me on weekends and we'd spend hours talking about her vision for their big day. She painted this beautiful picture of an intimate garden ceremony with string lights and wildflowers, maybe 50 or 60 guests, something elegant but not overwhelming. I got completely caught up in her excitement. She described the kind of venue she was dreaming of, and I'd immediately start researching options in our area. I made spreadsheets comparing prices, locations, and amenities. I called venues to ask about availability and pricing packages. I even drove around on weekends taking photos of potential locations that Sarah might want to consider. When I'd share what I'd found, Sarah's reaction was always so enthusiastic. She'd say things like, "Oh my God, you're amazing. I can't believe you did all this research." She'd ask me to email her the details, promise to look everything over with Marcus, and tell me how grateful she was to have such a supportive mother-in-law. But then weeks would go by without any follow-up. When I'd ask if they'd had a chance to visit any of the venues I'd found, Sarah would say they were still in the early planning stages, or that they wanted to take their time making decisions. Which made sense, I thought. They were young, they were busy with work, and planning a wedding can feel overwhelming. So I'd do more research. I'd find new options, create updated comparison charts, even reach out to vendors I knew through my volunteer work at the community center. I was genuinely excited to help them plan what I thought would be one of the happiest days of their lives. Looking back now, I can see the pattern that I completely missed at the time. Sarah would ask me to research something specific like photographers or florists. I'd spend hours putting together recommendations, complete with pricing and contact information. She'd thank me profusely, tell me how helpful I was being, and then nothing would happen. But there were signs I should have noticed. Small things that bothered me but that I pushed aside because I wanted to keep the peace and maintain our good relationship. Like when Sarah redecorated their apartment and threw away Marcus's childhood keepsakes without asking him. His Little League trophies, photo albums from high school, even a quilt my mother had made for him before she died. When I asked Marcus about it, he just shrugged and said Sarah preferred a minimalist aesthetic. I bit my tongue, but it hurt to see pieces of his history treated like they were worthless. Or the work parties. Sarah would mention her company's monthly social events, say something like, "We should bring you next time," but that next time never materialized. When I'd ask about it later, she'd claim she'd forgotten to mention it or that it was just a small, boring gathering anyway. Have you ever ignored red flags for family peace? I kept telling myself I was being too sensitive, that these were minor issues in an otherwise wonderful relationship. When they'd cancel dinner plans last minute, I'd think they're young and busy. When Sarah would go weeks without calling, I'd remind myself that no news is good news. I was so focused on being the understanding, low-maintenance mother-in-law that I overlooked the growing pattern of exclusion and dismissal. I wanted so badly for our family dynamic to work that I convinced myself these little slights were just growing pains. The wedding planning conversations continued for months. Sarah would bring up flowers and I'd research local florists. She'd mention music and I'd ask around about bands and DJs. Every conversation felt collaborative and exciting, like we were building something beautiful together. I had no idea that while I was pouring my heart into helping plan their dream wedding, they were already making completely different plans. Plans that didn't include me at all. Last Tuesday started like any other Tuesday. I was at work, catching up on some paperwork during my lunch break, when I remembered that Marcus had mentioned they were thinking about having an engagement party in the spring. With my job at the insurance office, I knew my schedule would get busy once the warmer weather hit, so I wanted to start thinking about requesting time off. I called Sarah around 1 o'clock, figuring she might have a few minutes to chat during her lunch hour too. The phone rang several times before she answered, and when she did, her voice sounded strained. Like I'd caught her at a really bad time. "Hi Sarah," I said, trying to keep things light. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. I just wanted to touch base about the engagement party. When you and Marcus start nailing down the wedding timeline, I'd love to know so I can request time off work in advance." There was this long, uncomfortable silence on the other end of the phone. I actually checked my phone screen to make sure the call hadn't dropped because it went on for so long. I could hear her breathing, but she wasn't saying anything. "Sarah? Are you there?" Finally, she cleared her throat and said in this tiny voice that was barely above a whisper, "We got married yesterday." I honestly thought I'd misheard her. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" "We got married. Yesterday. At the courthouse." The phone literally slipped from my hands. I'm standing in my office, staring at my phone on the floor, trying to process what I'd just heard. My son, my only child, the boy I'd raised for 27 years, had gotten married and I didn't even know it was happening. I picked up the phone with shaking hands. "Sarah, I don't understand. What do you mean you got married yesterday? What about all the planning we've been doing? What about the venues we researched? What about your dress? What about your family?" Her voice was still small, but now it had this defensive edge to it. "We decided we wanted something simple. Just immediate family. We didn't want a big production." Immediate family? I could hear my voice getting higher, but I couldn't control it. "Sarah, I am immediate family. I'm Marcus's mother. I mean, it was really just our parents and a couple of close friends. Very small." That's when the second bomb dropped. "Your parents were there? I thought your parents lived in California and couldn't travel easily because of your mom's work." Another pause. Then, "They've been visiting." "Visiting? For how long? Where are they staying?" "Look, I need to go. Marcus will call you later and explain everything." And she hung up on me. Just like that. My daughter-in-law, who just the week before had been texting me pictures of flower arrangements and asking my opinion on color schemes, had just told me she'd secretly married my son and then hung up on me. I sat in that office chair for I don't know how long just staring at my phone. How do you go from thinking you're planning someone's wedding to discovering they've already gotten married without you? How do you process being completely excluded from one of the most important days of your child's life? The questions were spinning through my head so fast I felt dizzy. How long had they been planning this? Who else knew? Why was I the only one left out? And what did she mean her parents had been visiting? Visiting from where? For how long? How would you react to this news? Your own child gets married and not only are you not invited, you're not even told it's happening until after the fact. You find out the same way you might find out about a casual weekend trip or a new haircut. I kept trying to think of some explanation that would make sense. Maybe there had been some kind of emergency. Maybe they'd needed to get married quickly for insurance reasons or visa issues. Maybe Sarah's parents had a health scare and they'd rushed to do a small ceremony before something bad happened. But even as I was creating these scenarios in my head, I knew they didn't add up. Because if there had been an emergency, if there had been some urgent reason to get married immediately, wouldn't Marcus have called me? Wouldn't he have at least let me know what was happening? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't some spontaneous decision or emergency situation. This was planned. This was deliberate. This was a choice they'd made to exclude me from my son's wedding day. But that was just the beginning of discovering how deep this betrayal really went. I couldn't concentrate on work for the rest of the day. Every time I tried to focus on something else, my mind would circle back to that phone call. We got married yesterday. Just like that. Like it was the most casual thing in the world. By the time I got home that evening, I was desperate for answers. I needed to understand what had actually happened because nothing Sarah had told me made sense. So I started asking questions. And the more I learned, the worse it got. I called my friend Linda, who knows everyone in the local wedding industry through her blog. I figured if there had been some kind of last-minute courthouse ceremony, she might have heard something through her vendor contacts. Linda, I need to ask you something strange. Did you hear anything about Marcus getting married yesterday? Sarah told me it was just a small courthouse thing, but I'm trying to understand what actually happened. There was a pause. Oh honey, I'm so sorry. I heard it was at Willowbrook Gardens. Jessica from the catering company mentioned it because they did such a beautiful job on short notice. Willowbrook Gardens. Not the courthouse. Willowbrook Gardens is one of the most expensive venues in the county. The place where we'd looked at photos online just a month ago, where Sarah had said, "Oh, this is gorgeous, but probably way out of our budget." Linda, how many people were there? From what I heard, maybe 18 or 20 people. Small but really elegant. They had the full garden ceremony set up, professional photography, the works. 18 people. Not just immediate family and a couple of close friends, like Sarah had told me. 18 people who were apparently important enough to be included in my son's wedding while his own mother wasn't even told it was happening. Do you know who was there? Linda hesitated. I probably shouldn't say, but since you're his mother and obviously should have been invited. I heard it was Sarah's family, some college friends, and several people from both of their workplaces. Workplaces. Plural. So not only had Sarah's entire family been there, not only had their college friends been included, but their co-workers had gotten wedding invitations while I got a phone call the next day. The picture that was emerging was nothing like what Sarah had described. This wasn't some spontaneous courthouse visit or simple family gathering. This was a real wedding with a real guest list at a real venue with real vendors. They'd hired a photographer, booked a reception, invited 18 people to celebrate with them. Everyone knew except me. Have you ever been the only one left out of something important? Not just forgotten or overlooked, but deliberately excluded while everyone else you care about is included? It's this horrible feeling that makes you question everything you thought you knew about your relationships. But the worst revelation was still coming. Because when I pressed Linda for more details about the guest list, she mentioned something that made my blood run cold. I think Sarah's parents were there too. Which was nice that they could make the trip. The trip. From California. Oh, I thought they lived here now. I've seen them around town for months. They were at the farmer's market just last weekend. Sarah's parents. The ones who supposedly lived across the country and were too busy to visit. The ones who couldn't make it for holidays or birthdays because travel was so difficult for them. They'd been living here. In our town. For months. While Sarah was telling me her parents were too far away to be involved in wedding planning, while she was painting this picture of a couple without much family support, while I was offering to help fill that gap, her parents were 20 minutes away the entire time. I hung up with Linda feeling like I was living in some kind of alternate reality. Nothing I'd been told was true. The simple courthouse wedding was an elaborate garden ceremony. The immediate family gathering was an 18-person reception. The distant parents were local residents. Every single thing Sarah had told me about their wedding plans had been a lie. That's when I realized I needed to talk to Marcus directly. I needed to hear from my own son why he thought it was acceptable to exclude his mother from his wedding while including 18 other people. I needed to understand how the boy I'd raised could look me in the eye for months while planning a secret ceremony. I called Marcus immediately after hanging up with Linda, but it went straight to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. I sent a text that simply said, "Call me immediately. We need to talk about your wedding." For 3 hours, nothing. 3 hours of me pacing around my house, going from confused to hurt to angry and back to confused again. I kept looking at my phone, willing it to ring, trying to understand how my relationship with my son had gotten to the point where he could get married without even telling me it was happening. Finally, around 6 o'clock he called. "Hi, Mom." His voice was flat, like he was calling to discuss the weather. "Marcus, what is going on? I just found out from Linda that you didn't get married at the courthouse. You had a real wedding with 18 guests at Willowbrook Gardens. Please tell me there's some explanation I'm missing." There was a long pause and then he said in this defensive tone I'd never heard from him before, "Look, Mom, we just wanted something simple. No fuss, no big wedding stress. We made it official and celebrated with the people closest to us." "The people closest to you? Marcus, I'm your mother. I raised you by myself for 19 years after your father left. I worked double shifts to pay for your college. I've been to every soccer game, every graduation, every important moment of your life. How am I not one of the people closest to you?" "It's not about that, Mom. It's about what Sarah wanted. She was worried about the dynamics, about things getting complicated." "What dynamics? What complications?" "Marcus, I've done nothing but support your relationship. I've welcomed Sarah into our family, helped you both with everything from apartment hunting to career advice. What exactly was Sarah worried I would complicate?" That's when he said the words that I'll probably never forget. "Mom, you're just a lot sometimes. Sarah was worried you'd take over, make it about yourself. We wanted something that was just about us." I actually felt my heart stop for a second. A lot. My own son thought I was a lot. The woman who'd sacrificed everything to give him the best life possible was now being described as too much, too overwhelming, too problematic to include in his wedding. A lot, Marcus? When have I ever made anything about myself? When have I ever tried to take over your decisions or control your life? I've been nothing but supportive of you and Sarah. It's not about what you've done, it's about Sarah's comfort level. Her family is different. They're more low-key about things. They don't make big deals about everything." "Her family? Marcus, you told me her parents lived in California and couldn't visit. Linda says they've been living here for months. How is that low-key? How is lying to me for months about where they live being low-key?" I could hear him getting frustrated now. "Mom, I don't have to justify every decision to you. We're married now, it's done and we're happy. Can't you just be happy for us?" "Of course I'm happy for you, but I'm also devastated. Do you understand that? I'm devastated that my only child got married and I wasn't even told it was happening. I'm devastated that 18 other people were important enough to include but somehow your mother wasn't." "It wasn't personal, Mom." "Not personal. My son excluding me from his wedding wasn't personal. When has your own child dismissed your feelings like they don't matter? When has someone you love more than life itself treated your pain like it's an inconvenience they don't want to deal with?" "Marcus, who else was there? I keep hearing about work colleagues and college friends. Help me understand who made the cut when your mother didn't." He was clearly uncomfortable now. "Some of Sarah's family, a couple of our friends from work, some people from college." "Your work friends were there?" "A few of them, yeah. So people he'd known for 2 years at his job were important enough to witness his wedding vows. But the woman who'd given birth to him wasn't even told it was happening." "I have to go, Mom. Sarah's making dinner." "Marcus, please don't hang up. Please help me understand what I did wrong. Please help me understand how we got to this point. We'll talk later, Mom. I need some time." And he hung up. Just like Sarah had. My son, who used to call me every Sunday just to check in, who used to ask my advice about everything from job interviews to what tie to wear, had just dismissed me like I was some annoying acquaintance he was trying to get off the phone. That's when I realized that if I wanted to understand what had really happened, if I wanted to know the truth about how my son's wedding had been planned and executed without my knowledge, I was going to have to find the answers myself. Because clearly neither Marcus nor Sarah was going to tell me the truth. I couldn't sleep Tuesday night. I kept replaying both phone conversations, trying to make sense of the contradictions and lies. So Wednesday morning I did something I'd never done before. I started really looking at Sarah's social media. I know it sounds like stalking, but I wasn't trying to invade anyone's privacy. Sarah's posts were public and I'd been following her for 2 years. I'd liked her photos, commented supportively on her updates. This was different. This time I wasn't just casually scrolling. I was looking for answers. Have you ever had to investigate your own family? It's this horrible feeling where you're searching for evidence that the people you love have been lying to you, hoping you won't find it but knowing you probably will. I started going back through her photos from the past year, looking at them with new eyes. There were pictures I'd seen before but never really examined closely. Restaurant photos, shopping trips, family gatherings. But now I was paying attention to details, looking for clues about when and where these things had happened. That's when I started seeing them. The older couple who kept appearing in photos. The same man and woman over and over again, in pictures that were clearly taken in our city. I could recognize local restaurants, familiar shopping areas, even the farmer's market that Linda had mentioned. Going back 6 months, there they were at a birthday dinner. The caption read, "Celebrating Dad's 60th with the family." And there was Sarah, smiling at a table full of people I'd never met, including the couple who were supposedly too far away to visit. 4 months ago, a photo of Sarah and an older woman getting manicures together. Mother-daughter mani-pedi day. Posted on a Tuesday afternoon while I was at work, thinking Sarah's mom was 3,000 miles away in California. The timeline was becoming clear. These weren't recent visits or special occasions. Sarah's parents had been living here, participating in her life, being part of family celebrations for months. Maybe longer. But what I found next made my blood run cold, and it had nothing to do with her parents' location. As I was scrolling through Sarah's photos, looking for more evidence of her parents' secret local residence, I noticed something I'd never paid attention to before. Some of her posts had been shared from private groups. You know how Facebook shows those little indicators when someone shares content from a closed group? I'd always just ignored those, but now I was curious. One of the shared posts was about wedding planning tips. It had been shared from a group called Wedding Planning Support Network. I clicked on it, not really expecting to see anything, but hoping maybe I could get a glimpse into what kind of wedding advice Sarah had been getting. That's when I discovered that Sarah had accidentally shared several posts publicly that were meant to stay within the private group. Facebook's privacy settings can be confusing, and it looked like she'd made some posts public by mistake when she meant to keep them in the group. What I found in those accidentally public posts destroyed me. The first one was a screenshot. A screenshot of a text conversation between Sarah and me from 2 months ago. It was from when I'd sent her information about 3 different wedding venues, complete with pricing and availability. In the group, she'd posted the screenshot with laughing emojis and the comment, "If only she knew we already booked our venue months ago. Should I tell her she's wasting her time or just let her keep researching?" I stared at that post for a long time, trying to process what I was seeing. While I thought I was being helpful, while I believed we were planning her wedding together, she was sharing our private conversations with strangers online and laughing about it. But that was just the beginning. The next post was even worse. It was another screenshot, this time of an email I'd sent her about local florists. I'd spent hours researching flower shops, comparing prices, even calling a few to ask about their wedding packages. In the group, Sarah had posted it with the caption, "Marcus's mom thinks she's planning our wedding and this is honestly hilarious." She made a whole spreadsheet. A whole spreadsheet. I had made a spreadsheet. I'd spent my weekend organizing information to help them plan what I thought was their dream wedding, and she turned it into entertainment for strangers on the internet. How would you handle being publicly mocked by family? How would you react to discovering that your genuine efforts to help were being shared online as jokes? But I kept scrolling and it got worse. There was a post from 6 weeks ago that said, "Emil texted asking if we want to do engagement photos this spring. Still hasn't figured out we're getting married in 2 weeks." How long should I keep this going? Followed by dozens of laughing emojis from group members saying things like, play along as possible. And this is too funny. 6 weeks ago. They'd already set their wedding date 6 weeks ago, while I was still helping them research photographers and asking about their timeline. While Sarah was texting me about engagement photos, she was counting down the days to a wedding I didn't even know was happening. The posts kept coming. Emil offered to help pay for the wedding today. Doesn't know we already have everything covered by my parents. Should I tell her we don't need her money or just let her keep saving? My secret wedding fund. The money I'd been carefully setting aside every month because I wanted to help them start their marriage without financial stress. She knew about it, and instead of being touched by the gesture, she was mocking it online. Then I found the post that broke my heart completely. Emil keeps talking about how excited she is to officially have a daughter and how much our wedding means to her. It's actually kind of sad how invested she is in something she's never going to be part of. Marcus feels bad but agrees it's better this way. My excitement about gaining a daughter-in-law was sad to her. My genuine happiness about their future together was something to pity and share with strangers for their amusement. But the post that made me physically sick was from 3 weeks ago. Final guest list is done. 18 people total. Al still doesn't know she's not invited. Marcus is worried about telling her, but I convinced him it's easier to just do it and deal with the fallout after. She'll get over it eventually. Like being excluded from my son's wedding was just a minor disappointment I'd bounce back from. Like 27 years of being Marcus's mother could be easily dismissed because it was more convenient for them to hurt me than to include me. There were dozens of these posts. Months of them. Every conversation we'd had, every moment I'd thought we were bonding, every piece of advice I'd given or help I'd offered, it had all been material for her online entertainment. The group members were encouraging her too. You're so smart to keep her out of the loop. Overbearing Emil's ruin everything. Trust me, you're doing the right thing. She'd created this narrative where I was the stereotypical controlling mother-in-law, even though I'd never acted that way. She'd turned my love and support into evidence of my supposed interference. And dozens of strangers were cheering her on. But then I found something that changed everything I thought I understood about why they'd excluded me. It was a post from 2 months ago with a photo attached. The photo showed Sarah and Marcus with her parents, all of them holding real estate flyers and smiling in front of a house. The caption read, "House hunting in Charlotte was so successful. Found the perfect place for after the wedding. Can't wait to start our new life in North Carolina." Charlotte, North Carolina. 6 hours away. This wasn't just about excluding me from their wedding. This was about disappearing from my life entirely. They were planning to move to another state and hadn't said a word to me about it. I went back through her posts with this new information and suddenly everything made sense. The secret wedding wasn't just about avoiding drama or keeping things small. It was about making a clean break. They were planning to get married, move away, and start their life together without me in it. The wedding was just the first step in cutting me out of Marcus's life completely. I found posts about job applications Marcus had submitted in Charlotte. Posts about Sarah's parents helping them research neighborhoods. Posts about apartment deposits and moving timelines. They'd been planning this exit strategy for months. While I was thinking about engagement parties and saving money for their wedding, they were planning to disappear from my life without so much as a goodbye conversation. She'd been making me the joke for months, sharing our most personal family moments with strangers, turning my love for my son into online entertainment, all while planning to take him away from me forever. But here's what Sarah didn't know about the woman she'd been mocking online for months. Here's what she didn't understand about the mother-in-law she'd been treating like a clueless obstacle to her happiness. I wasn't some lonely, powerless woman who would just quietly accept being discarded. I had spent 30 years building a life in this community. I had connections, relationships, and resources that she'd never bothered to learn about because she was too busy treating me like a joke. Sarah had made a crucial mistake. She'd assumed I was weak because I was kind. She'd assumed I was powerless because I was accommodating. She'd assumed I would just disappear quietly because I'd been respectful of their boundaries. But when you mock someone publicly, when you exclude them from the most important day of their child's life, when you plan to steal their son away without even a conversation, you don't get to control how they respond. I closed my laptop and sat in my kitchen, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Not just anger, though I was certainly angry. Not just hurt, though the pain was overwhelming. I felt determined. Sarah had spent months underestimating me, and she was about to learn exactly who she'd been mocking online. Sitting in my kitchen that Wednesday afternoon staring at my closed laptop, something shifted inside me. For the first time since that devastating phone call, I wasn't just hurt or confused or angry. I was thinking clearly, and what I was thinking about was everything Sarah didn't know about the woman she'd been mocking online for months. Sarah saw me as some lonely, naive mother-in-law who would just quietly accept being cut out of her son's life. She thought I was powerless, that I'd maybe cry a little, send some hurt text messages, and then eventually fade away into the background of their new life. But Sarah had made a fundamental mistake in her assessment of who she was dealing with. I've lived in this community for 30 years. I've been the volunteer coordinator at our community center for 15 of those years. Do you know how many people I've worked with in that time? Do you know how many connections you build when you spend a decade and a half organizing events, coordinating fundraisers, and managing volunteer programs? Have you ever surprised someone who underestimated you? There's this moment when you realize that someone has completely misjudged your capabilities, and you get to decide whether to correct their assumption. I started thinking about all the things Sarah didn't know about her new mother-in-law. She didn't know that I'd helped coordinate more than 50 weddings through the community center's event services. She didn't know that I had the contact information for every major vendor, venue, and service provider in a 30-mile radius. She didn't know that when couples needed help planning weddings on tight budgets, they came to me for vendor recommendations. She didn't know that I'd built relationships with photographers, florists, caterers, and musicians over 15 years of community work. She definitely didn't know that my best friend Linda, the one she'd heard me mention casually in conversation but never bothered to ask about, runs the most popular wedding planning blog in the tri-state area. Linda's blog has 50,000 regular readers, including most of the wedding vendors in our region. When Linda writes about industry trends, vendor ethics, or problematic client behavior, people pay attention. Sarah had no idea that the woman she'd been treating as entertainment for her Facebook group was actually connected to the very industry she'd been using to plan her secret wedding. But it went deeper than just wedding connections. Through my volunteer work, I'd served on committees with business leaders, city council members, and nonprofit directors. I'd organized charity events that brought together executives from major local companies. I knew people in HR departments, marketing firms, and professional organizations. The community center hosted events for some of the biggest employers in the area, including, I realized with growing satisfaction, several companies that did business with Davidson Marketing, where Sarah worked. I thought about all the conversations I'd had over the years with other volunteers, other committee members, other community leaders. How many times had someone mentioned problems with vendors who helped clients deceive family members? How many discussions had we had about the ethics of enabling deception in family situations? Sarah thought she'd been so clever, booking everything under her maiden name, using her parents' credit cards, keeping Marcus's name off most of the contracts. She thought she'd covered her tracks perfectly. But she'd forgotten something crucial about small communities. Everyone knows everyone, and information travels faster than gossip at a church social. The vendors who'd helped her plan her secret wedding weren't just random businesses she'd found online. They were people I'd worked with, people I'd recommended to other couples, people who knew me and respected the relationships I'd built in this community over decades. And when vendors discover that they've been used to help a client deceive and exclude immediate family members, especially when that family member is someone they know and respect, they tend to have opinions about it. I picked up my phone and called Linda. Linda, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. In your professional opinion, if someone used local vendors to plan a wedding specifically designed to exclude immediate family members, how would the wedding industry respond to that information? That's a serious ethical issue, Linda said immediately. Most reputable vendors have policies against enabling family deception. It opens them up to all kinds of liability issues. Why are you asking? So I told her everything. The secret wedding, the mocking Facebook posts, the months of lies, the planned move to another state. All of it. When I finished, Linda was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, Sarah has no idea who she messed with, does she? No, she doesn't. And I think it's time she found out. Sarah had spent months assuming I was powerless because I was kind. She'd assumed I was isolated because I was respectful. She'd assumed I would just disappear quietly because I'd been accommodating. But here's what she didn't understand about kindness. It builds bridges. And after 30 years of building bridges in this community, I had more ways to share information than she could possibly imagine. The woman who'd raised a successful man, who'd built a career and a reputation, who'd sacrificed everything for her family, was not someone you dismissed lightly. Sarah had no idea who she was dealing with, but she was about to find out. Linda called me back 2 hours later with information that made everything crystal clear. "I've talked to 5 different vendors," she said, and I could hear the edge in her voice. This wasn't a simple courthouse wedding. This was a full-service event that cost at least $8,000. $8,000. While I was secretly saving money to help them with wedding expenses, while Sarah was letting me believe they needed financial support, while I was researching budget-friendly options to help them have their dream wedding, they were spending $8,000 on an event designed specifically to exclude me. "Tell me everything," I said, getting out a notebook to write it all down. Willowbrook Gardens charges $3,000 just for a weekday ceremony rental. They had the full garden set up with the arch, string lights, and seating for 20 people. Professional photography by Mitchell Studios, which runs about $1,500 for a half-day shoot. Flowers by Garden Gate, probably another $1,000 for the arrangements and bouquets I'm hearing about. I was writing as fast as I could, calculating the numbers. This wasn't some last-minute, keep-it-simple decision. This was a carefully planned, professionally executed wedding that cost more than many couples spend on their entire celebration. The catering was done by Riverside Events. 3-course plated dinner for 18 people, which would be at least $2,000. And Jessica mentioned they had a custom cake from Sweet Celebrations. 2-tier design, probably another $500. When have you uncovered a web of lies so elaborate that each new piece of information makes the betrayal worse? Every detail Linda shared proved that everything Sarah had told me was deliberately false. "Linda, how far in advance would all of this need to be booked?" "For Willowbrook Gardens? At least 6 months out, maybe longer. You can't just call them up last week and book a Saturday ceremony. And coordinating all these vendors for the same date? That takes serious planning." 6 months. They'd been planning this secret wedding for at least 6 months while I was helping them research venues and create budget spreadsheets. While Sarah was asking me about engagement party timelines and thanking me for my research, they already had contracts signed and deposits paid. "There's something else," Linda continued. "I asked around about the guest list and people are talking. Marcus's work colleagues are saying he's been showing off wedding photos at the office for weeks. Sarah's college roommates posted about it on social media. This wasn't some intimate family gathering that nobody knew about." "What do you mean people are talking?" "Well, when a couple has an elaborate wedding and specifically excludes the groom's mother, people notice. Especially when that mother is someone who's known and respected in the community. The vendors are asking questions about why they were essentially used to help deceive you. That's when I realized the full scope of what they'd done. This wasn't just about excluding me from their wedding day. They'd involved dozens of people in the deception. Vendors, friends, colleagues, family members. Everyone had been asked to participate in keeping this secret from me. Linda, I need to know exactly who helped them with this. Every vendor, every person who knew and said nothing. I'll get you a complete list, but I can tell you right now that several vendors are very uncomfortable with their role in this. Garden Gate Flowers, for instance. Martha says if she'd known the situation, she never would have taken the booking. She's worked with you on community center events for years. I called the community center next and spoke with Patricia, who chairs the Employee Engagement Committee at Riverside Corp., one of the biggest employers in our area. "Patricia, I need to ask you something confidential. Does your company work with Davidson Marketing for any of your promotional campaigns?" "Yes, they handle our social media and some of our event marketing." "Why?" "I've discovered that one of their employees has been posting screenshots of private family conversations on social media, mocking the people in them. It made me wonder about their policies regarding client confidentiality and professional discretion." There was a pause. "That's extremely concerning. We share sensitive company information with them regularly. If they can't maintain appropriate boundaries with personal information, what does that say about how they handle business communications?" "I thought you should know. I'm sure it's just one employee making poor choices, but given how much confidential information companies share with marketing firms, I appreciate you bringing this to my attention. We'll definitely be reviewing our relationship with them." By Thursday evening, I had a complete picture of what had happened. The simple courthouse wedding Sarah had described was actually an elaborate garden ceremony that cost more than most people's cars. The immediate family gathering was an 18-person reception with professional catering and photography. The last-minute decision was a carefully orchestrated event that had been planned for at least 6 months. Every single thing they told me was a lie. But I also had something else. I had documentation. Screenshots of Sarah's Facebook posts mocking me. A complete vendor list showing exactly how much they'd spent. Confirmation from multiple sources about the guest list and timeline. Evidence of months of premeditation and deception. The simple courthouse wedding was an $8,000 lie, and I had proof. More importantly, I had a community of people who were starting to ask questions about the ethics of what had happened. Vendors who felt uncomfortable about their role. Business contacts who were concerned about professional discretion. Community members who couldn't understand how someone could exclude a loving mother from her son's wedding. Sarah had made one crucial mistake in her campaign to humiliate me. She'd assumed that exposing someone publicly would isolate them. But sometimes when the truth comes out about how someone has been treated, it doesn't isolate the victim. It rallies the community around them. The evidence was gathered. The network was activated. It was time to let the truth speak for itself. Friday morning, I made 3 carefully planned phone calls. The first was to Janet at United Way, where I've served on the board for 5 years. I was updating my emergency contact information and mentioned that Marcus had gotten married the previous week. How wonderful. What's his wife's name again? I'd love to congratulate her if I see her around town. Sarah Thompson. She used to be Sarah Mitchell. She works at Davidson Marketing. Oh, Sarah from Davidson. I think we worked with her on the spring charity drive last year. Such a small world. I'll definitely congratulate her when I see her at the quarterly business lunch next month. I could hear the genuine warmth in Janet's voice, and I knew that when she approached Sarah to congratulate her, she'd naturally mention how excited I must have been about the wedding. The conversation would flow from there. The second call was to Linda about her upcoming blog post on wedding vendor ethics. Linda, remember how you mentioned wanting to write about vendors who enable family deception? I think that's really important for the industry to discuss. I've been thinking about it more since our conversation. It's a serious issue that could affect vendor liability and professional reputation. I'm going to write about the importance of vendors asking questions when clients make unusual requests about guest communication or family involvement. That sounds like exactly the kind of professional guidance the industry needs. Do you believe in community accountability? Sometimes the most powerful responses to wrongdoing aren't elaborate revenge schemes. Sometimes it's just making sure the right people have the right information and letting natural consequences unfold. The third call was to my friend Margaret, who coordinates volunteer schedules at the hospital where many of our community center volunteers also serve. Margaret, I wanted to give you a heads up that I might need to adjust my schedule flexibility over the next few months. Marcus got married last week, and there might be some family adjustments as they start their new life together. Of course, dear. How exciting that must have been for you. I bet Sarah was thrilled to have such a supportive mother-in-law for her special day. Margaret's innocent assumption would lead to natural questions when she congratulated Sarah at their next volunteer meeting. Questions that would reveal the truth without any malice or deliberate embarrassment. By Friday afternoon, the truth was beginning to spread through our community networks in the most natural way possible. Not through gossip or deliberate campaigns, but through genuine congratulations and innocent assumptions about family inclusion. When community members approached Sarah to share in what they assumed was her happiness about gaining such a wonderful mother-in-law, when they mentioned how excited I must have been about the wedding, when they asked to see photos that included the whole family, the deception would become obvious. Sometimes the truth just needs the right audience. And in a community where relationships matter, where people know each other's families and care about how people treat one another, the truth has a way of creating its own accountability. I wasn't spreading rumors or sharing private information. I was simply being honest about what had happened when people asked natural questions. The community would draw its own conclusions about what kind of people plan elaborate weddings while deliberately excluding loving family members. The network was activated. The truth was spreading. And Sarah was about to discover what happens when your public behavior becomes public knowledge. By Monday morning, the ripple effects were already starting. Sarah called me first and I could hear the panic in her voice immediately. People at work are asking me about Marcus's wedding. They want to know why you weren't there. My supervisor wants to schedule a meeting about social media professionalism. What exactly did you tell people? I kept my voice calm and measured. I told people the truth, Sarah. When they congratulated me on Marcus's wedding, I explained that I wasn't invited. When they expressed surprise about that, I confirmed that yes, 18 other people were included, but his mother was deliberately excluded. You had no right to embarrass me at work. I didn't embarrass you at work, Sarah. Your own actions embarrassed you. I simply answered honest questions with honest answers. But the workplace concerns were just the beginning. Linda called that afternoon with an update that made me smile for the first time in days. The vendor community is buzzing about the ethics piece I posted this morning. I didn't mention any names, but I wrote about the responsibility vendors have when clients make unusual requests that might involve family deception. 3 different vendors have reached out to me today saying they've experienced similar situations and want to develop better policies. People started asking the right questions. When Martha from Garden Gate Flowers realized she'd helped plan an event specifically designed to exclude me, someone she'd worked with for years on community center weddings, she was horrified. When the photographer understood that he'd been hired to document a family celebration that deliberately excluded immediate family, he questioned his own professional policies. Have you seen a community rally around the truth? It's not dramatic or confrontational. It's quiet and powerful. It's people making connections, asking natural questions, and reaching their own conclusions about what they've witnessed. Janet from United Way mentioned to several people how surprised she was that I hadn't been at Marcus's wedding, given how close our family had always seemed. Patricia from Riverside Corp brought up concerns about Davidson Marketing's employee discretion standards during their quarterly vendor review. Margaret from the Hospital Volunteer Program expressed confusion about why a son would exclude his mother from his wedding day. These weren't malicious attacks or deliberate campaigns. These were genuine community members trying to understand how someone they knew and respected had been treated so badly by her own family. By Tuesday, Sarah's colleagues were asking direct questions about the wedding guest list. Vendors were discussing professional ethics regarding family deception. Community members were expressing concern about what kind of person deliberately excludes a loving mother from her child's wedding. The truth was spreading naturally through networks that Sarah didn't even know existed. She'd underestimated not just my connections, but the power of community accountability when people discover that someone they care about has been treated unfairly. Wednesday morning, my phone rang again. This time it was Sarah and she was furious. You need to stop this right now. If you don't call these people back and fix this situation, I'm going to make sure Marcus never speaks to you again. That's when I realized Sarah still didn't understand what she was dealing with. She thought she could threaten me into silence, manipulate me into covering up her own actions. She was about to learn that some battles aren't worth fighting, especially when you're already losing. Sarah's Wednesday morning call was different from all the others. Gone was any pretense of being the sweet daughter-in-law. This was pure desperation and rage. You need to stop this immediately. People are questioning my professionalism at work. Vendors are asking uncomfortable questions. Community members are treating me like I'm some kind of monster. This ends now. What exactly would you like me to stop, Sarah? Being honest about what happened? Answering questions truthfully when people ask me about my son's wedding? You know exactly what you're doing. You're trying to ruin my reputation because you're bitter about not being invited to a wedding that had nothing to do with you. When have you had to stand up to family manipulation? When someone tries to rewrite history and make you the villain for refusing to protect them from the consequences of their own actions. Sarah, let me be very clear about something. I didn't ruin your reputation. You did that when you spent months mocking me online, when you deliberately excluded me from my son's wedding, when you lied to my face for 8 months about your parents living 20 minutes away. Those Facebook posts were private. You had no right to see them. They were public posts, Sarah. You shared them publicly by accident. But even if they had been private, does that make what you said about me acceptable? Does posting it in a private group make it okay to mock someone who was trying to help you? There was silence on the other end, then her voice came back sharper than before. If you don't stop this campaign against me, if you don't call these people back and tell them you misunderstood the situation, I will make sure Marcus cuts off all contact with you permanently. And how exactly will you do that, Sarah? I'll tell him you're trying to destroy our marriage. I'll tell him you can't accept that he's chosen me over you. I'll make sure he understands that he has to choose between his wife and his manipulative mother. I took a deep breath. This was the moment. This was where I could either back down and let her continue to control the narrative, or I could stand firm and refuse to be manipulated. Sarah, go ahead and try. Tell Marcus whatever you want. But let me explain something to you about my son. I raised him for 27 years. I know the kind of man he is underneath all this confusion. And that man doesn't respond well to ultimatums. You're delusional if you think he'll choose you over me. I'm not asking him to choose anyone over anyone else. I'm simply telling the truth about what happened. If the truth threatens your marriage, maybe you should think about why that is. She hung up on me, but I knew she wasn't done. 2 hours later, Marcus called. His voice was tight with frustration and something that sounded like guilt. Mom, you need to stop whatever you're doing. Sarah's upset, people at her work are asking questions, and this whole situation is getting out of hand. What situation, Marcus? The situation where your wife mocked me online for months? The situation where you both lied to me about her parents' location? The situation where you excluded me from your wedding while including 18 other people? You're making us look bad to the whole community. Marcus, you are bad. What you did was objectively wrong. Excluding your mother from your wedding while including work colleagues and distant friends isn't a difference of opinion. It's cruel. We never meant to hurt you. But you did hurt me. Deeply. And instead of acknowledging that and trying to make things right, you're calling to tell me to stop talking about it. You want me to protect you from the consequences of your own actions. People are judging us. Yes, they are. Because what you did is worthy of judgment. When you deliberately exclude a loving family member from important events, when you lie to them for months, when you mock them publicly while accepting their help, people form opinions about your character. Mom, please. Can't we just move past this? I'd love to move past this, Marcus. But moving past it requires acknowledging what actually happened and making genuine efforts to repair the damage. It doesn't require me to lie to protect your feelings or Sarah's reputation. There was a long pause, and when he spoke again, his voice was quieter. I don't know how to fix this. Start by telling the truth, Marcus. Start by admitting that what you did was wrong. Start by understanding that actions have consequences, and those consequences don't disappear just because they're inconvenient. I wasn't backing down anymore. After years of being accommodating, after months of being manipulated, after a week of being blamed for their own actions, I was done protecting people who had deliberately hurt me. The truth was out, and I was going to let it stand. The rest of that week, the community response solidified in ways I never could have orchestrated myself. Linda's blog post about vendor ethics sparked industry-wide discussions. 3 wedding venues announced new policies requiring disclosure when immediate family members are excluded from events. 2 photography studios created guidelines about documenting family celebrations where key family members are absent. Sarah's workplace situation deteriorated when Patricia's company began questioning their relationship with Davidson Marketing. Other clients started asking similar questions about employee discretion and professional judgment. Have you ever seen truth triumph over manipulation? Sometimes it doesn't require elaborate schemes or dramatic confrontations. Sometimes it just requires refusing to be silenced while others draw their own conclusions. The vendors who'd worked Sarah's wedding reached out to apologize for their unwitting role in the deception. Martha from Garden Gate Flowers sent flowers with a note saying she'd never have taken the booking if she'd understood the family situation. Friday afternoon, Sarah accepted a position with a marketing firm in Charlotte and announced she was moving immediately. The job she'd originally planned to take after the secret wedding became her escape route from a community that now knew exactly who she was. Saturday morning, there was a knock at my door. Marcus stood on my porch looking exhausted and younger than I'd seen him in years. He was holding a small suitcase and had dark circles under his eyes. Mom, can we talk? Of course, honey. Come in. Sarah left for Charlotte yesterday. She said there was nothing for her here anymore, that everyone was against her. I led him to the kitchen table where we'd had so many important conversations over the years. What do you want, Marcus? I want my mom back. I want to understand how everything got so messed up. I want to know why I thought it was okay to exclude you from the most important day of my life. Sometimes justice comes naturally. When the truth is finally told, when manipulation is exposed, when people see clearly what really happened, the right outcome emerges without force or drama. My son had come home. That Saturday morning conversation with Marcus was one of the most important we'd ever had. Not just because it marked the beginning of healing our relationship, but because it helped me understand how easily manipulation can work, even on good people who love their families. Marcus sat at my kitchen table, the same table where he'd done homework as a child, where we'd celebrated his graduation, where we'd talked through every major decision of his life. But this time he looked like he was seeing everything clearly for the first time in months. "Mom, I need to tell you what really happened. Not the version Sarah told me to believe, but what actually happened." He explained how Sarah had slowly built a case against me over more than a year. Every phone call I made was reframed as clingy behavior. Every invitation I extended was characterized as controlling. Every question I asked about their lives was presented as invasive monitoring. She would take normal conversations we'd had with you and retell them to me later, making them sound completely different. Like when you asked about our work friends, she'd say you were prying into our social life. When you offered to help with wedding planning, she'd say you were trying to take over. What I learned that morning changed everything I thought I understood about family manipulation. This wasn't about Sarah being inherently evil or Marcus being weak. This was about how someone with bad intentions can slowly isolate a person from their family by reframing every loving gesture as something problematic. She convinced me that the best gift I could give you was independence. That including you in our wedding would somehow hurt you in the long run because it would enable your supposed need to control my life. Marcus told me about the Facebook group, about how Sarah had shown him selected posts from supportive group members who validated her narrative about overbearing mothers-in-law. She'd created an echo chamber where her version of events was constantly reinforced. I feel like I've been living in some kind of fog for months. Like I couldn't see clearly what was happening until everyone else started asking the same questions I should have been asking. We talked for hours that day. About how manipulation works by small degrees, how it isolates people from their support systems, how it makes victims question their own perceptions and memories. We talked about the difference between healthy independence and cruel exclusion. But most importantly, we talked about how to rebuild trust. "Mom, I can't undo what happened. I can't give you back your place at my wedding. I can't take back the months of lies and the exclusion and the pain I caused you. But I want to try to make this right." Marcus told me he'd realized the marriage couldn't survive the foundation of deception it was built on. He and Sarah were going to counseling, but separately now, each trying to understand their own roles in what had happened. I need to understand how I became someone who could exclude his own mother from the most important day of his life. And she needs to understand why she felt like isolating me from my family was the only way to have the relationship she wanted. What family healing wisdom resonates with you? For me, the most important lesson was that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or pretending that harmful behavior was acceptable. It means choosing to rebuild while acknowledging the reality of what happened. We spent the following weeks having conversations we should have had months earlier. About boundaries and expectations, about the difference between being involved and being controlling, about how to maintain family relationships while building adult independence. I also learned something important about myself. I'm stronger than I thought I was. When pushed to my limit, when faced with deliberate exclusion and public mockery, I didn't collapse. I stood up for myself while still maintaining my values and integrity. The community response taught me something else. When you live with honesty and treat people with respect for years, that builds a foundation of trust that protects you when someone tries to tear you down. The people who knew me didn't believe I was the controlling, overbearing mother-in-law Sarah had tried to portray because it didn't match their experience of who I was. 6 months later, Marcus and I have rebuilt our relationship on a much more honest foundation. We talk regularly, but he has clear independence. I'm involved in his life, but I respect his boundaries. He includes me in important decisions and events, but he makes his own choices. Sarah and Marcus divorced 4 months after the wedding. Not because of me, but because a relationship built on manipulation and deception rarely survives when the truth comes out. They're both in therapy, working on understanding their own patterns so they can build healthier relationships in the future. The wedding vendor community implemented several new ethical guidelines about family inclusion that have helped other families avoid similar situations. Linda's blog post led to industry-wide conversations about professional responsibility that continue today. But the most important outcome has been the conversations this experience has started with other families. So many people have reached out to share similar stories about manipulation, isolation, and the slow erosion of family relationships by someone with bad intentions. If you're dealing with someone in your family who's trying to isolate you, who's making you question whether your love and concern is actually harmful, trust yourself. Look at your history. Look at your actions. Look at the kind of person you've been over years, not just how someone is reframing recent interactions. Don't let anyone convince you that wanting to be part of your family's life makes you the problem. Don't let anyone make you believe that loving your children means accepting exclusion from their important moments. Family relationships require boundaries, respect, and honest communication. But they also require inclusion, consideration, and genuine care for each other's feelings. When someone asks you to sacrifice your place in the family for their comfort, that's not healthy independence. That's manipulation. The truth has a way of revealing itself, especially in communities where people know and care about each other. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to disappear quietly and let others see clearly what's really happening. My son's wedding happened without me, but our relationship didn't end without me. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone you love to make terrible mistakes unopposed. If this story resonated with you, if you've dealt with family manipulation or exclusion, please share your experiences in the comments. Let's support each other through these difficult family dynamics. And remember, you deserve to be treated with respect by your family. You deserve honesty. And you deserve to be included in the important moments of the people you love. Subscribe for more real family stories, and let's build a community where truth and healing are valued over manipulation and control.